All right, we're going to call to order the ARPA Committee meeting for the town of Chincoteague for May 4th. First on the agenda is public comment. I know we didn't have anybody sign up, but we're going to open the floor. If you guys want to step to the microphone and speak, have at it.
They're on the agenda.
They're on the agenda.
Yes.
Okay, well, all right. So if you're not public, we'll close the public comment period. I'll entertain a motion to adopt the next agenda.
So moved.
Second. Motion second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Mr. Talbert.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll refer to the first section here. We did have a question or two on nonprofits at the last meeting. I did find some guidance, and I found some more since then. I haven't gotten to you all because it was a recent find. But basically, assistance to small businesses and nonprofits includes, but is not limited to, loans or grants to mitigate financial hardships such as declines in revenues or impacts of periods of business closure, for example, supporting payroll and benefits cost to retain employees, mortgage, rent, utilities costs, and other operating costs. Loans and grants in kind assistance to implement COVID-19 prevention or mitigation tactics such as physical plant changes enabled to social distancing, and as of January of 2022, enhanced cleaning efforts, barriers and petitions, COVID-19 vaccination testing and contact tracing programs, technical assistance, counseling, or other services to assist with business planning needs. This is the guidance that has been published for small businesses and nonprofits. Since then, I have found some additional guidance. I'll pull it up for you on nonprofits. And I will say that starting April 1st, the final rule, not the interim rule, but the final rule went into effect April 1st. There are two major changes with what we're discussing tonight. One is, and it's a great change for us, the Treasury decided to give a standard allowance for lost revenue. And I think I told you all before that I went through used the calculator by GFOA and calculated our lost revenue at around $430,000, somewhere in that neighborhood, for the town of Chincoteague. And it was a long formula. It wasn't complicated, but it was a little tedious. But in any event, I went through the calculation. It's a little over $430,000. Treasury now has determined that you can take a standard allowance of up to $10 million.
Wow.
Standard deduction.
Standard allowance, and that's great because they also say that you can use it for government things. So
Things.
I'll read that to you because it's kind of amusing. Replacing lost revenue. And I didn't have time to get this out to you. I would have sent it to you so you could read it on your own. But okay, the standard allowance provides an estimate of revenue loss that is based on an extensive analysis of average revenue loss across the state and localities, and offers a simple, convenient way to determine revenue loss, particularly for SLFRF's smallest recipients, the town of Chincoteague. It allows you to use, I'm trying to find the phrase that they use. Government services generally include, you can use this for government services, anything for government services. Government services generally include any service traditionally provided by a government, including, and they give you for examples, construction of roads and other infrastructure, provision of public safety and other services, health educational services. Funds spent under government services are subject to streamlined reporting, which helps us also, and compliance requirements. The few things I think we reviewed before, you can't reimburse yourself for a loan, you can't use it in your retirement program. There's a few things like that really I don't think we were all considering anyhow. So those are the restrictions they're referring to. But basically, when the interim final rule came out, everybody was trying to maximize their lost revenue because that was the easiest thing to spend money on. You could spend money on just about anything. If for the up to the amount of your lost revenue. Now they've made it easy. You can take the standard allowance up to $10 million. Of course, we have under $3 million, so we could count all of ours as lost revenue and therefore it opens up the door to use it on anything that would be a normal government function for us. That does include, and they do say in here in another section, normal government thing would be to buy ambulances and police cars. That's a normal government function, so you can do that. So the compressor that we have bought, doing the street, proper street, this all makes this much easier to justify this change. The other change, or the other thing I was going to show you was the guidance with respect to nonprofits, and I'll load this up so you can read it. This is pretty short. Nonprofits have faced significant changes due to the pandemic's increased demand for services and changing operational needs, as well as declines in revenue. That's an important phrase. Sources such as donations and fees. Nonprofits eligible for assistance are those who experience negative economic impacts and disproportionate impacts of the pandemic and meet the definition of nonprofit, especially those who are 501c3, 501c19 tax-exempt organizations. They allow you to, recipients can identify nonprofits impacted by the pandemic and measures to respond in many ways. For instance, decreased revenue from donations and fees, financial insecurity, increased costs, e.g. uncompensated increases in needed service, capacity to weather financial hardship, challenges covering payroll, rent, mortgage, and other operating costs. So basically they're saying for nonprofits you can do it for their normal operations as well. There was a question that came in this week that I've been trying to find the answer to, and that is, can nonprofits be reimbursed for financial loss in a greater amount than they actually experienced? And I've not got a straight answer on this, but the general answer, the first snap knee-jerk answer is no. So that is an important thing to keep in mind. Again, loans or grants mitigate financial hardship, technical in-kind assistance, and other services that mitigate negative economic impacts of the pandemic, or other things that would qualify. Disproportionate impact nonprofits, they identify disproportionate nonprofits as those operating in a qualified census tract, or nonprofits operated by tribal governments, and nonprofits operating in U.S. territories, which none of which applies to us. So there is the quick and dirty and summarized guidance on nonprofits. Yes, ma'am.
Does it say anything? Is that all it says about nonprofits, or there's more, I'm sure, in there, or is that just the overview?
Believe it or not, that's a good summary of everything I've read, and you can word search a PDF document, which I have done for nonprofits, and if you take the final rule and search that, it doesn't pop up that many times. This is one of the better synopses I've seen of the whole thing.
Well, the reason I'm asking is, I know Jack had another question. He said he was going to email it to you, but I don't know if he did or he did. Are we allowed to give to nonprofits that are not here in this locality?
I haven't seen anything that would prevent us from doing that. But the other question he had is, can a nonprofit receive more funds than they actually show as a loss?
Mm-hmm.
And the answer I've gotten, no one with ARPA that I have found will give you a definitive answer. It's up to you to read the guidance and decide whether you want to do that or not. And of course, the other shoe that drops is they're in a hurry to get you to use the money, but 5 or 6 years from now when they decide to audit ARPA, you have to come back in and say, yes, we did it correctly. And that's what everybody is guarding against. But the first answer I get when I ask that question is, we think not, because any used, or the primary recipient, which is non-entitlement unit, which is the town of Shingatig, we cannot receive or use more funds than we've received,
Right.
Under loss of revenue. So we can't spend more than we've received under loss of revenue.
Right.
So I think Jack's question was, if a nonprofit receives funding from several different sources, and all of those sources are under the lost revenue, can they total more than in total, between
Right.
all of the sources donated, can they total more than lost revenue? And the answer I keep getting is, we think not.
Right.
But of course, no one's going to go on the record and say, no, absolutely not. And that's consistent with what I've read. It refers to in here many times, and I forget the exact phrase, but whatever grant or loan that you give has to be appropriate and measurable. It's a phrase similar to that. In other words, you can't give something that's disproportionate to what you're mitigating. In this case, you would be mitigating loss of revenue.
So my other question is going to be, just reading through the ESCADV, the summary here, requesting the ARPA funds. The executive summary says, their first paragraph, requesting that an Hancock Town Council designate $100,000 of ARPA funds to the coalition to assist with the renovation of the former GF Horn facility for use as the coalition's emergency shelter and offices. This new facility is being called the campus. It's requesting ARPA funds because the COVID-19 pandemic changed the way that survivors of domestic violence and sexual assault need to be sheltered, necessitating a new facility. So does it qualify this because they're doing something new, or?
That I would say that falls under the heading of a capital improvement.
Okay.
And I have not seen capital improvements referred to anywhere except in an NEU, primary recipient.
Okay.
I have not seen capital improvements in the guidance addressed for nonprofits or businesses that you would give this to. Now, there is something in the original guidance in the interim final rule that said, and this was before they came out with allowing us to take a standard allowance, that if you had a capital improvement that was budgeted when COVID struck, that you could use that money to fund the capital improvement, but it had to be in your budget. You had to show that it was in your budget
Right.
when COVID struck. Now, that's kind of gone away since they've just said, okay, everything up to $10 million, you're good to go.
Mm-hmm.
The other two things are that if you're spending money in order to be able to have facilities where you can now socially distance people where you couldn't before, then it's qualified. So that, and also in our particular case, we lost revenue because we couldn't use the shelters anymore. We had to use hotels. But that's not what we're going to use the money for. We just took a loss, but we lost a lot of money.
And that, from everything I've read, yes, nonprofits to the extent that you lost revenue, it can be recuperated from ARPA.
There's specific language, you know, that deals with if you have to modify your structure in order to allow social distancing, then that's eligible use of funds.
I haven't seen that as it applies to nonprofits. I've seen it as it applies to, if you've got some, that's great. I've looked, that's what I've been looking for, and I've seen it applied to NEUs, but to the primary recipients, but not to subrecipients.
Don't have it here. I can email it. Now that was in the original. The quote, I think the same quote that's in the letter that came from, but I think that was the interim guidance.
Well, and there's another clause in here, if you read it, that says the final rule, basically, it's a long paragraph, but basically it says the final rule will not contradict any guidance that was placed in the interim final rule. So. Mr. Mayor, that's all I had for you.
Okay.
Was that all?
Right. All right, so, moving on, I guess we need to review what's approved.
Well, this is.
And that was just the one or two that we had already, right?
This was just for your information,
Yeah.
to refresh everybody's memory, but what you see there are the three projects that either the council or the committee have previously approved.
Right, okay. So we'll move on to Mr. Landsberger, if he wants to do his request.
Hi, again. I'm going to read the letter that I presented to the council, so you're going to have to hear it again, and you're going to have to hear it. Well, you're all going to. You're the only one. Anyway, dear Mayor and Council, the Eastern Shore Coalition Against Domestic Violence is formally requesting $25,000 in ARPA funds from the town of Chincoteague. These funds would be used towards Escadive's capital campaign, which was undertaken to fund the remediation of the former G.F. Horn assisted living facility in Onancock. And you have a picture of it that I gave you. This 3-building facility on 5 acres will be the future home of Escadive's emergency shelter, advocacy and administrative offices, and community outreach and education space. This new facility will be called Hope Harbor. The shelter space will have a practical capacity of 30 as opposed to the former shelter, which could house 16 and often had a realistic capacity of 12 to 13. The new space will also allow Escadive to expand its services. Hope Harbor and the services Escadive provides are critical for Chincoteague, Accomack County, and the entire Eastern Shore because we are the only organization on the Eastern Shore that survivors of domestic violence and sexual assault can turn to when they need help. The total budget for the project is $1.7 million, roughly half of which has already been pledged or donated, including $100,000 from the town of Onancock. Work began on the emergency shelter last fall, and the targeted completion date is June 30th. Once the shelter is open, work will begin on the administrative and advocacy office. The hope is that the office building will be open next winter, with the 3rd building being remediated as funds allow. Escadive is requesting ARPA funds from the town of Chincoteague and many other incorporated towns on the Eastern Shore of Virginia because there are specific provisions in ARPA that allow for funds to be used to address the issue of domestic violence. The Department of Treasury ARPA guidelines specifically address the concerns the pandemic created for individuals impacted by domestic violence, stating, quote, stay-at-home orders and other pandemic responses may have also reduced the ability of individuals affected by domestic violence to access service. The guidelines also list services to address homelessness in such as supportive housing and to improve access to stable, affordable housing among unhoused individuals. Hope Harbor specifically addresses the needs of individuals impacted by violence and experiencing homelessness for all of Accomack County. Hope Harbor and the services Escadive provides are critical for Chincoteague, Accomack County, and the entire Eastern Shore because we are the only organization on the Eastern Shore that survivors of domestic violence and sexual assault can turn to when they need help. In addition to an emergency shelter, Escadive also provides 24-hour hotline, individual counseling, hospital and courtroom accompaniment, legal advocacy, safety planning, rape crisis services, and services to children who have experienced domestic violence. Annually, Escadive answers 250 hotline calls, shelters 150 people, and provides services to roughly 250 people. Half of those we serve are children. Without our services, all these people would have nowhere to turn to when they need help fleeing from violence. We hope that you'll consider investing in this critical regional project so that the Eastern Shore can be safer for all of us. Thank you. We're also going to have some outreach programs, some of which had started right before the pandemic, where we're going to work with the police force and educate them a little bit more and other emergency responders to know what we can do and what we can't do. And there's stuff that we need to be able to be a resource for everybody here, and especially on this island. We have a 90-mile long service area, and this is the only facility that we have. And all of these people, Shelley is going to talk a little bit. Shelley is the executive director, and I'm going to let her talk, and then if any of you want to get up and say anything, but other people who are on the board or who are concerned. Shelley?
Good evening. Yeah, you can hear. Sometimes I'm too short for the mics. So, yeah, thank you. Okay. I'm going to say what I was going to say, and then I was able to pull up some of the language that we had highlighted early on from the interim ruling on ARPA funds, and I'll just give you a highlight of that, and I'll email that to whoever wants it. But approximately 10% of our clients come from Chincoteague. So as Mr. Landsberger mentioned earlier, we don't have as strong a partnership with Chincoteague Police as we'd like to, but we are getting referrals and we are getting clients. Right now, I have 2 active clients, 1 adult, 1 juvenile that I'm aware of, and I don't always know all the details of every client we get, obviously. Both of those are sexual assault clients, unfortunately. So, the services are being provided to your constituents. We have, we've actually used hotels on the island for shelter in the past, and you may or may not be aware of that. We've had partnerships with the hotels to do that when other locations just weren't safe. And this is, as you know, can be very populated, but is also off the main drag. So we have partnered with businesses here and are providing all the services that are provided to the whole 90-mile service area. We also have a pretty heavy presence in our board, myself, that live here, and we do our best to kind of share that knowledge. One of my goals for this summer is to really work with a lot of our restaurants and bars around safety and education, and, develop some training around that. So we hope to expend those. With answers to the language in the ARPA funds, it specifically, and this, I'm not going to read everything that we had kind of gone through and underlined, but it specifically mentions domestic violence access to services, where it says stay-at-home orders and other pandemic responses may have also reduced the ability of individuals affected by domestic violence to access services. And then where we considered this, and I believe some other towns, as an allowable expense, was under the COVID mitigation and prevention. Mitigation and prevention efforts for COVID-19 include, and then it goes on to list several things, and then it comes to enhancement to healthcare capacity, including alternative care facilities, purchases of personal protective equipment, support for prevention, mitigation, or other services in congregate living facilities, nursing homes, incarceration settings, homeless shelters, or group living facilities. And then as it goes farther down, it says they also include capital investments in public facilities to meet pandemic operation needs, such as physical plant improvements to public hospitals or health clinics, or adaptations to public buildings to implement COVID-19 mitigation tactics. These COVID-19 prevention and mitigation programs and services, among others, were eligible expenditures under the CRF and are eligible uses under this category of eligible uses for the fiscal recovery funds. And this began as when we all got locked down, we had a tiny facility where we were housing 16 people in less than 1,000 square foot, and was just not doable with COVID mitigations. So we realized, while we may be slowly coming out of this pandemic, that we could have another situation where they recommend social distancing. We still are, keeping individuals socially distanced, and we want to be prepared for the next time that happens, because what we know is, initially, the first 2 weeks, phone calls almost stopped. Everybody was scared. Then when we moved in 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 3 months, the phone calls started rolling in, because now you'd had people that were already in an unhealthy situation. We'd put them in a space where they had nowhere to go. People weren't going out to work, and it had become even more dangerous. So we want to make sure that in, future situations, we're able to provide those services. And fortunately, the new shelter is going to have space where there is communal space, but each family will have space that will be private space. We'll have, like a mini fridge and a microwave. If they needed to isolate, they could isolate in our facility. So these really were mitigation measures based on the pandemic. And if, I can, like I said, I can email that. You probably have that somewhere in your records. And I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have about our services, our programs, the new facility. Anyone have any questions?
I don't think so.
Okay. Before we see, did anyone else want to speak?
I will.
Jenny will speak. Thank you, Jenny.
Good evening. I'm Jenny Barker. I grew up about 15 miles away from here and consider Chincoteague Island my home away from home. And I'd like to ask you to consider to please donating our full requested amount for the reasons that we've just spoken about today. I think you'll all agree with me that the Eastern Shore is more than a pretty landscape, but that we're also a community. And whether you're very fortunate or very desperate, we're all here to help one another. And I think that's really who we are. On a private note, I'd like to add that I was the victim of domestic violence, and I hope that this is striked from any public record because I do have children. Thankfully, I was never battered, and thankfully, I had a family I could come home to. But there are so many out there who don't. And I find that the services that ESCADIF provides is far more valuable than any of us realize because it does give people a place to escape, a place to find refuge, and perhaps a place to find the courage to start over again. So thank you all very much.
We've raised about half of the amount of money that is going to be required. We're up to about 900 for one point. And a lot of the towns, Accomack, and a lot of the towns, both Accomack and Northampton
Have contributed.
have contributed.
Yeah.
How about the county of Accomack?
Yeah, you just said they did. Accomack
And
and
we're
Northampton.
presenting there tomorrow night.
Okay.
Presenting again for a pretty hefty ask from them. So,
Yeah, that's what I was wondering.
yeah, we're trying.
David, you said you're at 50% of your target.
We've got between the pledges and what we've actually taken in, about 900,000 so far. The facility is purchased and paid for. We have enough money right now to finish the first building, which is the actual shelter. And the place was sort of set up to be kind of a shelter in the first place. It was a nursing home, but it was abandoned. And then the second building, we're close to having enough to be able to do that. There's a third building that we don't have enough money to do anything with. It's actually the one that's in the pool of the shape. And we also have land on 5 acres, so there's enough land that if we ever have to expand, we can build it. But that's where we are now. Previously they had a townhouse, which is the only shelter they had. Basically, only two places. They had a little tiny office on Main Street where the executive people were, and then they rented facilities for counseling and for everything else. So we're going to consolidate all of that into Hope Harbor, into the one campus. So they've already sold the office building, and they've sold the duplex as part of the fundraiser.
Has Accomack County contributed to the coalition before this?
Yeah,
In other words-
we're in their annual budget, and
Gotcha.
I haven't
Okay.
seen it. I think we're doubled this year, so.
Okay.
And the cases have gone, I mean, you lock people up together for 2 years, and you can figure out what happens.
All right, is anything, anybody on the committee have anything further, any questions or?
Mike, do we have a lot of nonprofit requests at this point in time?
A handful, and nothing official.
Oh, just people saying, hey,
Just
you know.
people saying that when it comes time, we will make a request. But no, nothing official, but there are at least 3 or 4.
And we have to, I think I remember you saying before, setting aside X amount of money
That's what
for
we had
nonprofits?
suggested.
Or we had suggested, and is there gonna be an application process?
Yes, as soon as we determine the guidelines for which we will award money, then we'll write an official application like we did CARES Act.
Okay.
That worked very well.
Okay. That's all I have.
Okey-dokey. Well, I guess we'll get back to you, once we get everything moving. And it's a lot of moving parts, but.
So can you consider this a formal request?
Yes,
Yes.
And then once you have a formal application process, you get it?
absolutely. Yes, it's on the record. It's on TV, YouTube, Facebook, it's there forever.
My golden line. Okay, thanks a lot.
Thank you, guys. Thanks for coming.
Hi, see y'all.
See you, Jim.
Did you want to do the executive session, it's information only, there's no action you have to take after the executive session, it's just informational on Sunset Day. Doesn't have to be done, I thought you may want to know.
Well, I know. Unless there's something else that's happened since that phone call. We might as well go in closed session just for the,
Okay.
I'll entertain a motion to go into closed session according to whatever the state code is. I forget what it is now.
It's right on the board.
Yeah, I know.
2.2.
2.2-3711A5 Code of Virginia to discuss potential business opportunities.
So moved.
Second.
Motion is second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.